morning, everybody. It's Tom Christie back in the painting studio, and this will be a continuation of the series on creating a Ringneck Drake Hunting Decoy. So in the previous series of videos, I took you through the carving steps to get to this point, and this will be session one of painting this bird. Yeah, I've got it primed and ready to go, and this will be a simplistic paint job because it is meant to be a hunting decoy, a gunning decoy, so we don't want too much fancy paint on here. I am going to comb some vermiculation, so that's a quick way to simulate the vermiculation on the side pockets. I may do some combing on the head, show you how to do that. But even though it's simplistic, it needs to be effective from a distance and really convey the essence of a ringneck drake. So that's the goal. If you're enjoying the channel and getting value out of it, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps me out, and it doesn't cost anything. But I would appreciate it as I continue to build this channel and offer free resources for people who really want to take a shot at carving hunting decoys or wildfowl, or if you've already been doing that and these might be helpful to improve your own techniques. I'm learning all the time too. So let's get going on base coating the Ringneck Drake. Welcome back. Thanks for joining in. If you've purchased any of my painting videos, which are available on tomchristieart.com, my website, for sale over there, by the way, there's about 15 different painting videos over there. I like to start with a base coat of a mixture of Liquitex acrylic gesso, maybe 10% of that, with 90% of Liquitex heavy body acrylic. This is burnt umber, and then I tint that a little bit to the gray side with carbon black to come up with this mixture that's a nice heavy, but primarily it is paint mixture, so no fillers added. And I'm going to paint that on the decoy, and then I use a sponge to kind of texture areas of the decoy. And then we'll use a comb. I've got several here to comb the vermiculation, but I'll take you step by step through those. The first thing we need to do is get a good base coat on the decoy, and we'll do that next. All right, so I've got like a 1-inch wide angle brush here, and I'm just going to use that to spread this material on. I want to leave the bill smooth because we want it to be smooth when we're done, so I don't want to put any texture on the bill itself. So I'm going to paint this material on and then use the sponge to put a little bit of texture into the paint, and that lends itself to the some of the painting techniques that we'll go through as we paint this bird together. So I work a section at a time because we don't want this material to dry before we get it sponged and textured. Now I'm putting a little material on the palette and using, this is close-celled synthetic sponge. There's nothing special about it. I pulled this out of some packing material for some electronics that I purchased. You can buy this type of material on Amazon. You just have to look for it. It's not that expensive. I prefer to get it free out of packing materials. I'm just using, I loaded the sponge by dabbing it into the material on the palette and then going to the bird and dabbing it on and avoiding putting any texture on the bill again. And then I'm going to do this over the entire bird and try to get a nice consistent, I don't want this to be sandpaper rough. I want it to be nice and fine
And you can do that by going back over it and trying to get consistency in the texture throughout. You can see it's a little heavy right there, so I'm just going to go back over it carefully and knock it down a bit. Try not to leave too much heavy paint around the eye. So this takes some time, but hopefully you get the idea here. The other thing is helpful is you can cut some smaller pieces of sponge and use those to get in tight spots, like under the neck typically is, or under the chin is a difficult area to get to, especially if it's a lower head bird and the bill is right down on the breast. A little angle like this helps you get in there and get a little bit of consistent texture on that area of the bird as well. So I'm going to go over the entire bird, get that done, and then come back. All right, I've got that textured, and I did go ahead and put a base coat on the bill with a filbert, so it's nice and smooth, but it just adds a little foundation to the paint to go on top of it. And I made sure I painted in the corner here. That's a vulnerable spot for water because of the separation there, so it helps seal that up. Now I want to do a little layout work with a chalk pencil and decide where we want this combing on the side pocket vermiculation. All right, I've kind of penciled in where the breast meets that white portion of the side pocket. And if you look at your reference, the vermiculation goes up to a certain point and then fades out, and this becomes very white up here right under this hook area is a part of the hook. So we're going to want to do that in the paint and leave this area unvermiculated, uncombed. So we'll kind of fade the combing out up here so that we can have this nice vermiculated gray side pocket, light edge on the top, fading into that white area before the black breast. By the way, you might have wondered, why did you texture this before combing if you're going to comb it anyway? It's a good question, but I've always done that because I think a little texture underneath helps in the combing process to kind of hold the paint that you want to remain in place while you comb off the part that you don't want to have there. So it's the paint tends to slide around less with a little texture under it. The vermiculation is super tight on a ringneck drake. You can barely see it. I've got super tight combs, but I think I'm gonna go with a little heavier comb because, again, this is a gunning decoy. I want to be able to see the vermiculation, and my theory is a little heavier combing may serve me well here on this particular decoy. We'll find that out. All right, so I'm going to use that base material in a 1-inch flat brush and lay on enough material that I'll be able to comb through it and it'll leave ridges. So you just kind of have to experiment with that, how much material to put on. How much is too much, and you'll be dragging too much on your comb, and not enough, the ridges won't be discernible. So okay, I've got a section ready. I'm going to go a section at a time, again, because I don't want the paint to dry out. I've got paper towel here ready and water because I'm going to want to wipe off as I go through this process. So I'm just trying to simulate that up and down. I don't have quite enough paint in that area. No problem, just go back and add a little bit. I want these combing lines to be nice and clean. I'm wiping off between every stroke of the comb. And trying to kind of follow the side pocket structure a little bit. Not quite enough paint right up here, which is very typical. Right near the edge, it's easy to go shy on the paint and not have enough there to really define that. And we want it nice and clear on the top of the side pocket there. Trying to put some zigs and zags in, and I'm not trying to, since this is a gunning decoy, I'm not trying to go overboard, you know, with individual feathers. I'm just combing the area. And I'm wrapping, as I approach the bottom, wrap back up towards the front of the decoy. Give you a quick look at that in the light. So now I need to add more paint here before this paint dries. Make sure I'm in the camera. This is that area we said we would fade the vermiculation out, so I'm going to thin up the paint material up there. Basically fade it out into the texture below. So I've got very little left to comb up there, and that should fade out naturally then. And that's a little messy, so I'm going to stop. Put a little more paint in that area. Get my comb ready. I'm going to dip my comb in water and wipe it off to make sure the comb is not loaded with paint. That's another technique you can use, is go down and pull a little paint onto the comb. If you're a little shy of paint where you're working, and then pull that in. Getting closer to the front, I'm trying to make these a little bit smaller arcs. And I'm starting to wrap around. Now I want to fade out here. And since I put less paint there, it's doing that by itself. I'm going to put a little more paint down there because I think there should be some there. And then as you go, you might find areas that are a little heavy, and while the paint is still wet, you can go back and pull through them and clean things up, no problem. It's just once it starts to dry, you can't do that. You gotta call it quits, dry the paint, start over. So I'm putting a little more down in this area, like we talked about. Pulling through that. I've got a little area here that's dry that didn't pull paint through. So I'm going to go back and add a little to that area. Again, we're trying to go for nice, clean combing lines. So I'm going to unload the comb, go back through that area. If you look here, I'm not happy with that area. There's not good clean combing lines, so I'm including that because these videos have a tendency to make everything look like it happens perfectly the first time, and it doesn't, as we know. So I put some more material on, going back through that area. Critical while this is still wet. Clean that area up. And fade it out. That just cleaned that area up, so we've got good clean comb lines. Good clean lines all the way up to the top of the side pocket. So now I'm going to dry that, and then we'll work on the opposite side. Same way, so I won't take you through that, but same process on the opposite side. All right, I've got the side pockets combed. A little better view with the light there. And now I want to do a little bit of combing on the head. This is an old technique that's normally allowed it's allowed in this specific category of gunning that I'll be participating in. And looking at the reference, up here in this crest area, you can see some looseness in the featherings up there. Same on this, when that crest raises up. So I want to put a slight indication of some texture up in this area of the head, maybe coming back here, and a little bit on the top of the cheek as well, because there's a little bit of purple iridescence in the head of a Drake ringneck, and I think having a little bit of that texture in there will give me a chance to just highlight that and convey texture, but also the iridescence. So to do that, I'm actually going to use a piece of a head comb, a pocket comb, and put a little bit of material on in that area and actually comb through it like this. And this is a technique that I first saw Bob Boley in Roseville, Michigan used this technique on a lot of his gunning decoys. And so thank you, Bob, and I'm sure others use it as well, but he was the first one that I saw use it back in the 80s. And so we'll give that a shot, and I don't want to go overboard and texture the whole head, just again, an indication here on the side, both sides. So let's do that next. All right, I'm going to start with the filbert, and I'm going to put a little material above and behind the eye to the back of the head. And I'm using the filbert so I can kind of fade that out into the texture around, because I don't want to texture the whole head, just this kind of rear crest area. So as I go to the back of the head, I'm just lightly fading that out so there's not much material back there to comb through. Make it heavier in here. And heavier on the cheek. And up and over here. It really gets pretty coarse right back here, so. All right, let's give this a try. I've got my head comb here, pocket comb. I'm going up and over. As I get down, I'm going further back. So I can go through this multiple times until I'm happy with the way the texture is coming out. And we don't want wavy lines, we want nice flowing lines. And that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to come down to the cheek and pull down through that. Kind of down the side of the head. I know this is hard to see in the video. I'm going to a smaller comb to try to hit this intermediate area. And make sure the flow lines make sense. Let's see how that looks. Not bad, not bad. I think I want to add a little material back here and carry this a little further around the back of the head. Going back to my big comb. It's challenging to get a nice flow because the comb has a tendency to want to wander all over the place, and we're looking for nice straight flow lines. And by going over it a few times, you're creating the illusion that feathers are overlapping. I'm going to hit this intermediate area one more time. You can see I'm just trying to pull in long flowing strokes to get nice smooth combing lines. That looks pretty good. I think I'm going to call that good. Maybe clean up a few. I call it good and then I keep working on it like usual. Clean up a few things down here. And now I'm going to go around the perimeter with a little bit of the sponge and just kind of fade those whatever's left into the surrounding texture, so we don't have a hard line between the combing and the surrounding area. Same up here, back here. You can see there's a little bit of a hard line along the back of the head. I'm going to want to go in and blend that out a bit with the sponge. Not a lot, and I don't want to remove the combing lines. Just want to blend it into the area around. Hopefully you can see that in the light. Do that on the other side. Let that dry. We'll be good. Here's just a quick look at that combing, the way I came out under overhead lighting. And it's subtle, but it kind of adds a little feathery look to the head. So I'm happy with that. And we'll move on. All right, I've got Nimbus Gray, some white gesso, and a touch of raw umber to warm things up a bit. And I'm going to use that as the base. Kind of very light gray color for the side pockets. Paint right over the combing. And I'm going to carry that gray up to where the vermiculation stops, and then kind of fade it out, because this is going to go off-white in front. This will take a couple of coats to cover the gray base color. I don't want to make this too dark, because we're going to darken the vermiculation on top of it, and that'll take things down a notch in terms of making it a little bit darker than it is right now. And we don't want that side pocket to be charcoal gray. It's kind of a nice warm light gray value. So I'll put 2 coats of this light gray mix on and then come back. Before I do come back, I'm going to take my off-white mix, which is white gesso with a little bit of Josania raw umber, on a clean brush, and I'm going to paint that up in this forward position, right up to the hook area here. And then while this gray is wet, I'm going to go across that area and blend it into the gray, so we have a nice soft blend across that area. And again, this will take a couple of coats as well. And I don't want a big hard line of paint here, so I'm just softening that edge a bit by scrubbing over it. And then I'm also going to use that off-white mix to lighten the top of the side pockets like I've done on this side. So I'm going to run that right across the top of the side pocket. And blend that into the gray while the gray is still wet. I'm going to take that light value around the end of the side pocket and a little bit down here below. Now I've got to work on this blend a little bit, and I'll do that by going back and forth with my gray value, blending in the other direction, kind of scrubbing wet on wet until we have a nice soft transition there. The other thing I like to do, I'm rushing this a bit, but just to explain, is take some clear water and a clean brush and run that across the junction between the light and the dark, and it has a tendency to blend those together nicely. Same thing down here, just clear water. Takes a bit of the gray, a bit of the white, and blends them together so it softens the look. So I need 2 coats of gray on the side pocket, but that shows you what we're doing. I'll get the second coat on here, get this blended, and then we'll be ready to add the darker colors. Now I've got a mixture of white, black, with some raw umber, and I've got it on a flat brush, and I've removed most of the paint on paper towel, and now I'm just dragging it across the surface here to highlight the combing and create the vermiculation. Just a very light touch. And right now I'm just going one direction. And then I want to fade that into this lighter white area. So this needs to be pretty subtle and light. But that's about what it looks like. I'll come back and pick up some of these. Again, without a lot of paint on the brush. Got pretty good control on how dark and light to make these. And we don't want, if the paintbrush is too wet, it'll just start driving paint down between the vermiculation grooves, and we don't want that. Just a nice soft look. Now we'll pick up this other side pocket, and I don't think I even need to reload the brush. I'm just going to keep going with what I've got here. Notice I'm not hitting the white part up above. I'm just kind of fading into that because we want to keep that light. Very light touch. It's important you have a flat brush too, nice and flat. So it's just bridging over all of the ridges and just hitting the tops and not, as I said, diving down into between the tops, between the ridges. That looks pretty good. I'll work on that a little bit. We'll continue to work on the blend here, but it looks pretty decent. If you have a spot like this where I got too much dark paint or the combing in that area allowed for some sort of ridge, I can just go back in with the lighter value and clean that up so that it's not something that draws your eye. Here's another one. This line is a little thicker than the ones around it, so I'm just gonna quickly thin that up a bit There's a dark one down there. So you can do some touch up. Take care of, here's a good area. There are 2 dots there, and it doesn't take much to just go in and make those disappear by lightening the value around it a little bit. Now I'm just going to use straight carbon black and go in here and paint the head black. We'll add some color to this later, but this just gets us a nice dark base to work from. And I'm not painting the bill because it's going to end up multiple colors. So we'll leave that gray for right now. I'm painting right over this texture that we combed into the head. It's a good idea, by the way, to use a little piece of sandpaper to pull over that texture, just to knock off any sharp corners that might be there from the combing process after the combing has dried. So I'm going to paint the head, the breast. I'm going to paint right over the neck stripe right now because we'll come back and put that in over the black. I'm going to paint the head and the breast, the back, the tail, everything except the tail and the primaries, this carbon black. It's just a quick look at those areas that I painted carbon black. I went ahead on the primaries because we're going to lighten those a bit, but it was easier to just paint the black, and I can use that as the base. Starting to look like a ring neck. For the tail, I'm using a mix of burnt umber, Nimbus gray with a touch of carbon black to make this dark gray value. So I'll use that same color underneath. Get that blocked in. I've got burnt umber, Nimbus gray, and just a touch of black on this mix for the primaries. I'm just blocking those in. A little more of a brown shade than the tail feathers. Just a note, I did paint the rear edge of the tail feathers black so that we don't have that lighter gray. Projecting from a distance, it makes the tail look real chunky, and that black will have a tendency to fade into the rump from a distance. So I like to paint it that way, especially when the tail is pretty beefy and thick. All right, now I want to create a little bit of a highlight back here, running up kind of in the middle of the back on both sides. And to do that, I'm going to use burnt umber with a little bit of Nimbus gray in it. And I've got that on a kind of a splayed out old filbert, and I'm going to scrub down the center here. It's very subtle, but I want to kind of lighten the center area. And then fade it out to black, leave it black on the edges, in the center, and also along the top of the side pockets. So we're just going to lighten this value a little, and that'll allow us to come back with some carbon black and just put some slight indications of feathers on the scapulars on the back. And there's a little green iridescence on the back of a ringneck drake, so this will allow us to play with that a little bit, just to give an indication of some greenish iridescence. It's a technical term, greenish. I just made that up. So I'm lightening the tertial area, because we're going to want to just put some outlines in there to define a few feathers back there. So again, we don't want this to get too light, but we want it to be light enough to show when we add a few darker feathers. We want them to show up a little bit. I'm going to leave the cape just black. Hopefully you can see that highlight. I'm going to do the same thing then on the breast. Hit the center of the breast, lighten it a bit, and then let it fade out as it goes towards the edges. For the same purpose, we'll be able to just do a few feathers on the breast, or indications of feathers, rather than just a solid black mass up front. We don't want too much detail, just enough. So again, I'm fading that out as I get close to the edges and let it be black. And just highlighting kind of the central area. I'm just scrubbing back and forth, and I think that's enough on there that I can put a few black feather tips on the scapulars and on the breast. Okay, now I'm going to take some carbon black and just go in and put an outline around the tertials. Do a shorter one here. Same thing on this side. Just a few quick lines. Like that. Down here, there's just the beginning of a lighter group of feathers. This is Nimbus Gray with a touch of carbon black. So just a touch down there. Same on this side. And then I want a nice black edge on the top of that. Those feathers are edged in black. Good. Okay, now I've got a little fan blender. I just put some carbon black in it. And I just want to go in here and pull in some feather edges quickly. Not going to spend a lot of time on this, but give an indication of some feather structure here on the back. That's about all I want to do. It's very quick. And then we'll do the same thing on the breast. You push down and pull up. This you have to experiment with. You need the right amount of water on the brush to deposit, but not too much that you leave too much paint. Okay. I'm taking Nimbus Gray with a little bit of burnt umber, and I've got too much water in there. Just going to put some quick feather edges on the tail feathers. Just one line. going to use that same mix and do the same thing with just a few primary outlines. There's not much showing here, so there we go. That's done there. They make a brush called a filbert comb, and the bristles are kind of splayed out at the end by design, and it's a good brush to, I've got a little carbon black on here, and I'm just pulling that across the junction here, and it's a real quick way to get a little bit of a softness to that transition between the white and black. And now I'm just taking a mixture of brilliant green and phthalo green with a lot of water, and just coming in here and putting a light wash over these lighter areas to just give the hint of some green iridescence. It's not really iridescent paint, but it's going to give the indication that there's some iridescent greenish shade in those feathers. So that's done. I'm going to go back over those black areas just to darken those up and make sure they're nice and dark. Hopefully you can see just a very subtle indication of some greenish feathers. Just a little wash. Okay, just a quick look at the bird under the light. I did go back and put points and take some carbon black and form some feather tips there, and put some quills in place.
All right, we'll call that a wrap on session 1 of painting the gunning ringneck drake. We've got the body pretty much done. Next time we'll get the ring on his neck, paint his head, get some iridescent appearance in the head, and then get the bill painted, and we should be done. So until next time, Tom Christie signing out. Good carving and painting to you all.